Hey everybody, welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. I'm Molly Herford, author of a few books on cycling, with one coming out next summer, which is very exciting for me. Also a writer about kind of all things fitness related, and currently just about over the recovery from an ultra run.
And I'm Peter Glassford. I am a registered kinesiologist and an endurance coach.
And not recovered from your newfound running hobby that you've picked up this
I
week.
like to stay in a pretty overtrained state at most times. It sort of conditions you.
Yeah.
Come out of that any time by just doing nothing, so it works out.
It's true. It's really good for when you want to take a 10-day vacation.
Yeah, except you have all this energy all of a sudden, so.
Yeah, he's really annoying on vacation.
Yeah. Apparently I was very uppity on the last one, so people liked that for the most part.
What were you uppity about?
I think it was hot off my victory.
Ah, yes. Yeah, the cheering noises you made for yourself as you came in seemed a little
the
excessive.
entrance music and so forth. Yeah.
I mean, it's just our spare bedroom office. I don't think it really... The confetti gun seemed a little bit much.
Yeah. So it's a long weekend. Happy end of summer. Just sad to say, but...
See, for you, I love the back-to-school thing. I get such a rush when I walk into any store and they have a back-to-school section set up. So if we suddenly have a lot more pens, I apologize.
I don't know if you can ever have enough pens, but it's certainly the coming of the pumpkin spice latte seemed to be big news, and then also cyclocross has arrived. Mm-hmm. So the discipline of cycling that takes place in the fall in the mud.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had one day, actually, I think it was Monday, no, it was maybe Tuesday, where it was a little bit chilly, a little bit drizzling here, and I just, could smell in the air that cross was coming, and I just, perked right up, even though we don't really have any major race plans this year for cyclocross. It's still just a really magical time of year for me.
Yeah, I haven't really planned. I have a bike, though, so when people ask, I say I'm a step closer to racing, but I don't know. I do have the coming this Thursday, so that is, what is the date this Thursday? It's the 6th of September 2018, I think is the year.
Yes.
Yes, indeed. So the Cyclocross Mounts and Dismounts online course is coming from the Ryan Leach membership site, which has all sorts of different courses and tutorials that'll teach you to bunny hop or corner. So we've added the Cyclocross Mount and Dismount to that series of courses.
Oh, and one surprise thing I get to drop on you actually right now is my yoga hip opener flow is also going up on the Ryan Leach site.
So that's definitely the cool thing with the membership is you get coaching, so you can post videos of yourself trying to do a bunny hop, or now the cyclocross mount or dismount. You can get feedback from a variety of coaches, including Ryan Leach, who's trials pro extraordinaire and quite talented rider. But there's people like Shams March and a bunch of really cool cyclists, but then also there's a bunch of yogis, including Ryan, who's also an accomplished yogi.
Sounds really weird when you say it.
That is the term. I didn't make it up.
I know, but I just picture
Ryan
Leach.
The emphasis on the E is a little over the top.
I'm just picturing Ryan Leach dressed like Yogi Bear, just taking out a picnic basket and sitting down, and you just watch a video of him eating a picnic.
I'd go to a yoga class with Yogi Bear. I feel like that would be pretty big.
We actually did a bunch of Ryan's yoga classes this time last year during cyclocross season. Us and the team mechanics would...
Mechanics loved Ryan Leach. He's so chill.
So chill.
Some would say Canadian, but just chill.
But if you're not into super chill yoga, my hip opener is a little bit more sarcastic, and I'm not going to say faster paced, but it might feel faster because I speak quickly. Yeah,
so we'll put links to, I guess, both of those in the show notes, but you should find that at ryanleach.com. I think last time we had a smartathlete.ca/CX course for the CX course, but if you just watch our Twitters and stuff this week, I'm sure you'll get spammed with that.
It's true.
What else is going on?
Oh, man. Well, we had a pretty good recovery week. We jumped in the pool on Monday to sort of just move our muscles a little bit. I remembered why I hate lane swimming. I spent a lot of time like an angry New Jersey driver that I am.
I'm pretty excited for it. I'm rereading, I guess, Sheila Taormina's her book, and she was on the podcast. One of my favorite episodes because she turned out to be probably the most consummate athlete we've ever had because she's gone to the Olympics for triathlon, decathlon, and then also swimming. So she had to learn to horse ride and fence to be
So
part
rad.
of the decathlon. But we'll link to that in the show notes because you need to check that episode out. But her book is actually, I found really, really motivating to go try swimming, and it's high end and focused on getting faster. But
It's called Swim Faster, right?
I don't think that's what her book's actually called. I can go grab it here, but her book is really good, and it's got me excited. Some cool stuff, and it's well worded for like a skills book. I think that's what I also like about it, is just seeing how different skills books and skills content is worded.
Whereas I just get grumpy in the pool whenever there's more than 2 people in a lane. It's not their fault, but just...
It's definitely the downfall of...
PSA, if you're in a pool with me, please be in the correct slow, medium, or fast lane.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in a place where if we could just find a few more people, it's not that expensive. I mean, I guess it's more expensive than the $4 that it costs to go lane swim. Lane swimming is pretty cheap.
Yeah. Anyway.
So we're excited about swimming.
You're excited about swimming.
Oh, okay.
I'm moderate on swimming, but it felt good to do that after, pretty crazy weekend. And I do think it's such a good recovery tool. Like, I felt so much better after having done that compared to if I just walked or tried to get out on a
especially
run.
compared to anything running for sure, right, where there's no impact in swimming and it's more upper body focused. You didn't find, like, from a sort of glute posterior chain that you get sore or just fatigued?
No, but I'm not like you. My kicks aren't, like, moving the water by, like, yards
because
or
of my strong legs.
Yeah,
I'm a cyclist, so that makes me better at swimming.
Not your wildly inefficient stroke or anything like that. No, you've seen me swim. My legs move like 2 inches. I don't do anything with them.
I don't know if that's true, but... so anyhow, I think that's also sort of coming into running and cross training season for a lot of summer athletes. If you're coming out of a variety of these summer sports that we've talked about, it's probably becoming sort of change of seasons. It comes with fall.
Yeah.
So I mean, strength training is definitely sort of ramping up for a lot of athletes. So we're rebuilding plans for that and getting people sort of back into the gym and back into running. So this is my yearly caution to go very slow and do about 50% of what you think you can do. If you've got a history, probably do about 10%.
It's funny. I was listening to a podcast that was actually trying to be more like it was more of a lifestyle, like business kind of thing, and they were giving this example of like only doing what your effort should be what you're the most trained to do. So the woman's example was like, if I want to run a 30-mile run, but I've never done more than 4 miles at a time, like that doesn't actually make sense. Like you would never go from 4 miles to going out and doing a 30-miler. But for some strange reason, I think a lot of cyclists in particular that we know have this tendency to be like, oh, well, I ride bikes, so therefore I can run a half marathon or a marathon or like a really hard 10K effort just off the bike.
Yeah, I think it's because it seems like it's such a cardiovascular, like aerobic sport, which it is, but it's also very limited by your soft tissue, so tendon, ligament, muscle, right? And so in a lot of ways, it's more like a plyometrics training or strength training where you're going to get sore. We all would agree that you get sore from running, you get sore from strength training. But for some reason, people are generally more cautious with strength training. And I think maybe just because at some point you can't lift the weight, right?
It's true. It feels very obvious. Whereas running, I think you can run yourself into the ground before you realize that you've overshot your ability level.
And I think for most of us, it's not like an explosive, like I pulled my back out deadlifting or something, right? Whereas with running, maybe you'll start being a little achy, but you can push through a fair bit, especially if you're an experienced cyclist, you're used to pushing through pain, right? But yeah, it's just all those tissues adapt so slowly, right? So it's definitely ease into it now before you get the need to do it. It's a good thing to be able to do.
So actually, on that note, we had this listed as one of our last Q&As, but I think we might as well just bring this to the front. Running and cyclocross, I mean, how many of your clients are asking about it or just, maybe doing it without mentioning it and having this problem that we're talking about?
I don't know if a lot of them do anything secret like that. I could be wrong, but...
if you do, stop it.
But it's definitely a question that comes up, right? Like, should we be doing more running training or, should I start running now in anticipation of cyclocross?
Or in the middle of the season, should I start running because it's cyclocross?
Yeah, and that does happen. People get nervous. They either hear someone's doing it or they, get beat up a run up, right? So cyclocross, for those that don't know, it runs, it's often in a park, and it's there'll be places where you're forced off your bike. Now, the key, I think, before we go, I had it written down. The key is that the longest that run, in theory, can be forced is 80 meters. Now, that doesn't, if it got really muddy or, I guess not sandy, it wouldn't get randomly sandy, but if it was very wet out, you could possibly have to run conceivably for a whole lap or something in like a complete mutter.
I know, I'm going to say I really can't name a single race that I've seen other than maybe Cyclocross Worlds in 2013 for the Masters on the different course than the Elites, where running was the 100% deciding factor because it was so muddy that you couldn't ride huge chunks. Running can be a deciding it can be a decisive factor for sure, but I've never seen a race go beyond 80 meters.
Yeah. Yeah, 80 meters isn't that far, right? So, it's certainly possible. And I think it also goes a bit with your ability to run things, right? So you could see someone in a long sand pit or something. So it certainly could, but we're not talking a marathon. And I think everyone can agree on that. And even in the muddiest of muddy races, most people will probably be on their bike for maybe half the race, would be a horrible mutter. And it will seem like you're running for a lot. Mm-hmm. But then if you do that for most people, we're talking 20 minutes of running interspersed, right? And then even running, I think if we look at the confines, so whenever we look at a movement or, a sport demand, we're going to train for something, you need to look at, what is this? Well, number one, you're never going to not be holding a bicycle. That's against the rules. And I think that gets left out of a lot of the, should you run for cyclocross articles and conversations it's just you're never not holding a bicycle. So
if you're not, you've done something very wrong.
You're disqualified, right? So that's important because you always have something that you could potentially lean on, or that's going to be sort of changing your center of mass and just making running sort of clunky, right? But a lot of times people are running beside a bike, and if you can run beside a bike well, you can lean on that bike. So now you've just taken a lot of the loading out of that anyhow, right? So if you think about running along a side hill or up a hill, you're going to lean on that bicycle. The other thing to remember is that it's never on pavement. You're not going to choose to run on pavement that you could just ride on, but no one's going to make you dismount onto pavement. That's very dangerous. So running, like most of us would probably do when you said, okay, I need to run for cyclocross, right? It's going to end up being a 20-minute. That's what you read. I've linked to a couple articles. Chris Mayhew has a great one for Cyclocross Magazine. A lot of times what's suggested is a run walk building to 20 minutes in the morning or something like that, and it's just clunking along at 10-minute or 12-minute miles or something.
Right.
So it's a lot different than sprinting up a hill that's covered in mud or sand or it's all off, and leaning on a bicycle and going as hard as you possibly can for did we say 80 meters maybe, which would be long. Right, so it's not really running in my mind. You're essentially it's almost more akin to not scootering, but you could make analogies to other things that are probably just as similar, like skateboarding or
rollerblading.
Yeah, I don't know. The key to me, and this is where most of the articles sort of go, is that most people forget that you're spending a majority of the time pedaling a bicycle on varied terrain. So a lot of people forget that they need to go ride these cyclocross bikes in grass and bumpy terrain and learn to roll over stuff without flatting and hop over stuff. And then also the important bit of getting on and off the bike, because you can run as fast as you want. I've seen lots of great runners really be bad at cyclocross because they never actually practiced and got proficient at the cyclocross mounts and dismounts, which you can do with the new online course coming this Thursday.
Dun, dun, dun.
So that's, I think, when I look at the movement, I think a lot of people forget that concept, that it's never running on pavement, it's never moderate, it's never easy. You would never run it would be maximal. So in that vein, what my suggestion is, throughout the year we should be, especially for mountain bikers, it's harder for road riders, but if you're a cyclocross fiend, I would say you could probably do a gravel or cyclocross ride every week of the year. In those, incorporate some sort of dismount mount, in a park or something. Maybe a hike-a-bike, so a slow speed but walking up hills. This could be also the family dog walk, could go up a couple hills to build that calf strength and your ability to walk up hills. And then as the cross season approaches, I really like the workouts. I didn't invent them by any stretch, but like a 30-30-30-30, or I think that's like, what is 30 to the fourth power or something, cubed, not cubed.
Sounds like 2 minutes.
Yeah, so essentially, yeah, it's a 2-minute bout, and you can go up to 10 minutes total, but you're going to cycle through basically running as hard as you can up a hill, and then you sort of would jump on your bike and coast down, and you can decide what you do during the off period. And then you would ride really hard. That could be up a hill or across a sand thing, or however you want to divide that out. So maybe another 30-second riding hill, and then 30 seconds easy again, sort of coasting down a hill, working on skills. And then you're going to cycle back through. So this uses the Cyclocross mini loop that I really like, and is featured in the Cyclocross mounts and dismounts course that launches this Thursday. But that, to me, really isolates running into like an interval session with your bike.
Right.
Because to me, it's completely different running with a bicycle and having to mount and dismount on both ends of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've also seen some people get like so out of control on the run because they hadn't practiced that kind of running that they botch the dismount horribly.
Right. So I think that's really, that would be the main way. You know, I've seen Mike Garrigan used to just, while we were riding along, if he saw a patch of grass, he'd just dismount and like run for a bit and then run.
Literally the most annoying thing that Mike Garrigan does. Mike, if you're listening, I remember this from college. Fair
enough. But I mean, I think that's something you could just throw in, especially as the season approaches, and that's getting used to that impact of coming off the bike and just the on and off portions. But I think it's really that the mounts, dismounts are the big piece, and then I think just including it into workout. So that might even be, you know, building, you have your Wednesday night cross practice, you probably have a run up and a thing. So to me, that's taking care of the running mostly. So I think from the only other thing I would add, that from a consummate athlete standpoint, I think being able to run, especially in the Canadian winter, is a good thing.
That's what I was going to add, yeah.
And that's almost an aside, right? And I think, you know, if I had athletes training in the gym, we'd probably be building towards doing some sprinting or some sled work, some weighted carries for sure, but certainly building towards sprinting and working on running form. But I don't see a ton of cyclocross people necessarily doing that, but that is definitely like an athletic, like, is it good to be athletic? For sure. But I think most people, when they ask this question, they're asking in a very almost last minute sense about adding 20-minute jogs, and I think that answer is just, to me, definitively no. There's absolutely no reason to spend 20 minutes doing that.
No, I'd say if you have an extra 20 minutes, your better bet would be to be doing more of like a short yoga routine and some core work and like a bit of strength versus a 20-minute easy run.
I mean, you have to know the person, but I think you could make a compelling argument, right? So you could do that. You could, like, I'm
going to make that argument because cross hurts. Like, you're super sore after a good cross
and when we're
race.
thinking about the mounts dismounts, how many people are maybe limited a bit in their hip mobility, you know, or running up hills, you know, those calves, hamstrings, or maybe something. Could you do some sort of core workout as part of that yoga routine? We'll link to Molly's morning yoga and then also to my Anywhere core routine. You know, would that sort of give you the impacts and the muscle loading, get rid of some of that muscle soreness, you know, without leaving the house?
And as you're teaching remounts and dismounts, I mean, we do talk a ton about planks and like how it's a pretty similar motion in a lot of ways to doing like almost a bird dog plank.
Yeah, for like cornering and for mounts, but it's sort of hard to explain in audio. But the idea is that, you know, being an athlete, you learn to apply tension to keep your balance, to keep your position. So if you think about cornering as maybe an easier analogy, you have sort of pressure into your handlebars, or maybe pushing maybe into that inside hand or both hands, leaning the bike into the corner, and then certainly that outside leg is probably down in cyclocross. So you can see how that might be like a plank where you lift your opposite hands, right? There's tension across your body. So there's all these things that are transferable, right? And then you're like, okay, well, is a plank more similar to running up a hill, right? You know, maybe a plank with some metabolic demand, I don't know, versus running on flat pavement at a very clunky pace.
Yeah.
And I think you'd have to look at the athlete, right? If someone was horrible at running, again, this might be a place where we actually have to work a bit on sprint mechanics, or, you know, someone even skipping. To me, like, you'd almost be better to learn how to skip. If you were dead set you were going to spend 10 minutes, you know, twice a week.
Oh, 10 minutes of skipping just sounds like hell.
Well, I mean, again, you could interact skipping with planks. Maybe that's our cyclocross training. But the reason I like that is you get quick footwork. You're getting sort of that loading of your calf foot. And I think the coordination piece is really important, but you're getting sort of that running mechanics, right? I could, again, that's something I could explain more in person, I think, but skipping is got these nice light steps, sort of rhythmic, sort of landing maybe lightly on your foot.
Sure.
And I think for a lot of us that maybe didn't grow up running a ton and have sort of that big clunky, I guess heel strike for lack of a better term, but just we run big pounding steps. That's sort of handy to sort of figure out, but
yeah. All right, so that sort of sums up, I think, our views on running for cyclocross. But if this is a topic that super interests you guys, let us know over on Twitter or Instagram or pretty much anywhere, because we're contemplating doing an episode talking to a bunch of
maybe getting people on the phone for quick opinions or something like that. Maybe this is when Jeremy Powers finally appears on the podcast. Who knows? But yeah, I think so. We'll link to Chris Mayhew's stuff. I said also we'd link to some core stuff there. But that should, I think, at least present the general argument.
Yeah. All right, so that is that, but let's keep going on cyclocross. You've been getting a lot of questions about tire pressure, both for mountain biking and cyclocross. So let's do, a primer on tire pressure here. And I will note, you mentioned this in the remount and dismount course.
It's launching this Thursday. I don't know if I mentioned that.
Actually, so I did want to just put it out there because I feel like courses sound really expensive. This one is actually not.
You said that it's really cheap. It's free.
Really cheap. Yeah, you should do it.
No, it's $19.99. I think is going to be the fee, and then you can also get all the Ryan Leach courses. The membership is actually the same price, so you can either get the one course or you can get the membership.
Which is then a monthly.
Yes.
Yeah. So I just wanted to put that out there in case people listening just kind of dismiss the idea of course because they think courses tend to be in the couple $100 range.
No, I mean if it saves you from bashing your face off of a barrier, I mean $20 is nothing.
Yeah. Okay, anyway, back to tire pressure. Sorry.
That was such an odd ad.
Hey, I'm trying,
yeah,
right?
Okay, so
I got made fun of for our ads at the last cyclocross clinic we did.
Really?
Yeah, he was one of the guys, and I can't remember, and I apologize because he's probably listening right now. He's like, yeah, you guys really are really awkward doing ads. And I was like, yeah, man.
Yeah.
That's
well, maybe we'll just put them in like this. I much prefer performance art like this.
I mean, I think even this counts as our awkward, but...
I don't know. It's more conversational.
We're doing what we can.
Okay, let's talk about tire pressure. What do you run for tire pressure?
I pretty much, I'm going to admit I'm really bad for this. I don't really do digital gauge very often.
Okay, well that's the first thing. We should measure. This is the measure if we manage.
Okay, would you let me finish?
No, I'm just saying that this is an important piece. When people are talking about this and it's getting heated, right? We're not getting heated, but just when people get heated.
I'm getting heated because you didn't let me finish.
No, but I'm going to let you finish in a second. But
oh my God.
So
he's conjuring.
So the digital gauge, especially for cyclocross, is important because we need to know what we're talking about. If you're just going to use an analog gauge off of the old pump or everyone's different pumps, then it's not going to the argument makes no sense. So digital gauge.
Anyway, I generally go thumb test style because that's sort of how I learned. And
can you give us a brief? People have a lot of trouble with it.
It is a really weird one, and I've actually found it kind of works out well because. A bigger guy, a 230-pound, beefy dude, his thumb pressure is going to be different than mine, but it's going to be kind of almost relative. So I try to do it where I can almost get down to the rim if I, push as hard as I can on the cross bike for just, a normal course where there's nothing crazy happening. And I'd say a bigger dude, that 230-pound guy, is going to have a much higher pressure in order to get that same thumb press down because if he presses down on a 20 psi tire,
right,
he's gonna hit the rim very easily because his thumb's gonna be
well, and I think that's maybe where that's come from and why it's lasted, right, is that he sort of goes with grip strength, which then correlates maybe to full body strength and which correlates to full body size.
Yeah, roughly. So I tend to run when I have checked it in that 22, 23 psi on tubulars for cross.
Right.
On an average course.
Yeah, I think that's valid. So we'll link Helen Wyman actually, I think on her site, but I'll link to it. If you look up Wyman method maybe for like Wyman method tire pressure. I'm sure you'll find it, but we'll link to it. She has a nice sort of formula based off of body weight, and it assumes that you're using tubular tires, or I think tubeless, or maybe even cotton clinchers. Sort of, there's always going to be these different types, different examples, and then different courses, and then your skill sort of varies with this, right? So whenever people ask what tire pressure, it depends so much, right? And it's talked about all the time. I remember Powers would get asked at the races all the time what tire pressure, and I was just like, how can you possibly, like, how is that relative to this person who weighs 30 pounds more than him and isn't maybe as smooth as him, right?
We couldn't say anyone weighed less than him. That's just not allowed.
I guess that's fair enough. The one I'm thinking of anyhow was quite a bigger person asking. So the important piece, I think, is that, so within tire types, in cyclocross at least, you'll have tubular and tubeless. In mountain biking, you have tubeless. So I think you're speaking similar languages. And generally in that range, I think what you'll see people run is sort of 20 to 30 PSI. You're always going to have people outside of that range, but I think most of the time you're going to have people in that range. And I think in sand, your very, very light people will run down into like the teens. On some bumpy course, you're going to see the bigger people running up 35s or something. And I think if you get into clinchers or tires with tubes, and this would again apply, I think, for mountain biking, and I would sort of have people start in around 30 PSI, so maybe call that 25 to 35. And again, you're going to have people that somehow run 18 PSI with tubes and never flat. But a lot of people are going to have to be well up into those 30s to keep the tire on.
Skill really matters, especially with mountain biking.
Skill and tactics, I think, right? Like if you're going to bounce your front wheel off of barriers, then you're going to probably have to put more air into it. Like you just can't run 18 PSI and bash your front wheel into a barrier. If it was really rocky, same thing. And so I always come down, this is the question, again, people are asking at a race. Like this is where that cross practice, instead of running in the morning, should we be out testing tire pressures, test the gauge and then go out and ride the local sand pit or the local grass and see how low can you go until you actually feel something, right? When you're pre-riding a course, and this Helen Wyman's method, she suggests starting on the low end with this formula, and then if it's good, it's good. If you're feeling it peeling or you're bumping off stuff, add a PSI and try again. I tend to start on the higher side and go lower, but she's much more accomplished than I am, so take that for what it's worth.
Well, it depends on if you're okay with flatting your tire.
Well, maybe she has a better tire budget. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and then we'll link to the digital gauge that you like.
The toe peak, yeah.
So
it works the best. Yeah, do we need to talk about tire gauge?
I think just in the sense of if you keep doing all of this experimentation, it really helps to record some of this stuff. Like after a race, maybe note Gloucester, which is super grassy and not super techy, I could go down to 8. I ran 18 psi. It felt great, and that way next year when you're racing Gloucester, you can look back on your Training Peaks or whatever app you keep this info in and be able to say, oh, okay, this is what I ran. This is at least my starting point for figuring out what pressure to run this weekend.
Yeah, I would say new athletes, so maybe the first 5 years, or if you just haven't paid a lot of attention in your first 20 years like myself, it's worth journaling for sure. And when I say journaling, I don't mean in the current sense of dream journals or whatever, but
hey, I'm manifesting.
It could maybe be in the same book, but basically you'd write, my strategy is to have the name of the race and the date, and then I like to draw the course, and then I like to put what equipment I ran. And then I also like to sort of write out things I'm worried about, and this is maybe in the days ahead or the week ahead.
I was going to say this is almost more.
But it's a pre-post, because I also would have a section in that journal where it's just how it went, what did I learn, and then next year, and then it is quite handy to have that till then when you return to whatever event, right? Yeah. Most people will stay doing the same sport and stuff, so I think this applies to most things, right? You return to the same area to ride, you have an idea. I think a lower level thing that a lot of my clients will do is in their training log, which is Training Peaks, they'll just put tire pressure 22, 21.
Yeah. So I just actually want to talk about the race day journal for a sec, because this is one of my favorite things that I think that you do. and it's a thing I kind of adapted this year for road racing, was the pre-race journaling, where you're getting all of like the information kind of written out, and like schedule, like writing down the schedule of the day and like all the pertinent information and figuring that out. Because how many masters do you know, or riders that you know, that who show up like a little too late to like get the good parking space, or like this, that, and the other thing, or forget this one crucial piece of gear. But if you kind of spend like half an hour journaling out that schedule and like list of stuff you need to bring to your race, you're just not going to have that issue.
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of, I don't want to pick on masters, but masters have families that they have to organize and think about, whereas junior racers are usually they have a team of people helping them. But for both, for anyone, I think planning out in the days ahead, what does race day look like, maybe going as far as what does the day before the race look like, and that's like a by hour sort of setup. And so you might have, you wake up at 7 and have your coffee and breakfast, and then you're going to fill your bottles, and then you're going to go to staging or get your bike marked, or in running it might be staging, and then you're going to go to the washroom, and when you're going to do your stride warm-ups,
then you're going to go to the washroom again.
Yeah, so I think planning that out so that you have this routine, and it does become fairly common sense, and you become pretty good. Like I say, once you get past that like 5 years of, I'm trying to think of the long-term athletic development model, the fundamental stages.
I mean, you say that, but last year when we were working on Aspire, actually the last 3 years, every weekend I had an hour-by-hour schedule that went out to everyone, like all the racers, all the mechanics.
And that's like a logistical thing, so I mean that's slightly different when you're organizing people.
Yeah, but
right?
it had like their pre-rides and all that stuff in, like, and they didn't look at the calendar or the schedule. They looked at this document that I
I mean, it's
out.
good to plan. It eliminates choices and decisions you have to make day of, right? And you're just really trying to eliminate that, I guess, decision fatigue. That where you're not sure about things.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're trying to develop that routine where you're just used to eating at this time and eating this food at this time and eating, warming up at this time, putting your shoe on at this time, right? Like it's all planned out and it's just routine. It's like your everyday, right?
Yeah, exactly. Cool. All right. Enough about that. The next question kind of is around structured workouts. So I actually really like this one. How to do a structured workout on the mountain bike. And this is something I have an issue with, actually, because I find it really hard, especially for efforts, to do much on the mountain bike on like any kind of technical terrain or anything like that. So.
Right. And I think we could probably expand this out. I think it's probably the same way you do structured work rock climbing or structured work running, trail running.
Just where the nature...
Did they list their main concerns or the struggles they're having? Oh, no, okay, it's down there. I thought it was the bigger one.
No,
okay, so we have...
The bigger one's my favorite, so I'm saving it for last.
Gotcha. Okay, so we have like a heart rate monitor, maybe a Garmin with some, a variety of elevation and GPS-based stuff, and then we also have sort of our perceived exertion. So I think the key thing is you're going to warm up. Then you're going to cool down. That's what's, going to make a good standard workout. I think mountain bikers as a whole are big on the arrive at the trailhead and straight up the mountain.
A lot of the time, there's not a lot of choice in terms of the trail, right? Like,
sure,
you get on whatever trail is at the trailhead.
If you're there, yeah. And I mean, if you're with a group, everyone starts and they're free to do. It's not their fault. They can do whatever they want. What I try to encourage both to add a bit of training stress to the day and then also, to drive less and then also so that you're actually warm and like mentally checked in. It's not just your body and the blood flow and muscle activation that we're trying to get. But by riding on the road ahead of time, and that could be with structure or just your gradual warm up based on your feeling, but just not huge loads climbing up a hill. And again, this is the same for running. You're just trying to get mentally checked in, right? Like mountain biking is hard and quite technical. Trail running, you have, routes and stuff you have to be paying attention to. So to try and avoid falling or feeling like crap, warming up. So you could park further away from the trails, right? We're fortunate we can ride to a lot of the trails here. Not everyone does it though, right? A lot of people drive because they're
a pretty long ride.
Well, they're mountain bikers and that's not what they do, right? And riding a mountain bike on the road is sort of, weird and clunky, but it does add training to your day. And a lot of times people do it, even a partial drive, they park, they get out of the city and then they park at the bottom of whatever, the mountain, and then ride up or something on the road or however it works. But they find that the time is actually the same, but they actually rode an extra 10, 20, 40 minutes, right?
Right.
So warming up is important. Cooling down, we did have sort of a side question about cooling down. I think it is worth sort of spinning out, especially after anything that's hard. So the idea with cooling down to me is like you're sort of just revving the engine back down and your heart rate's coming down and normalizing. And it's easy to see what I mean in a very isolated like trainer situation or something. But if you've done intervals, your heart rate's up. So like you could finish a race and sit still and your heart rate's up. Right? So that makes sense. So the idea with the cool down to me is that you're trying to make that heart rate normalize so that like when you're sitting still, it's a normal heart rate for sitting still. But you would do that maybe just cooling the engine down, right?
Yeah.
So you're just going to spin lightly. I don't think for most people they need to do a lot, but we've had questions about cyclocross today and sort of double weekend, like where you're racing twice in a weekend. I think that's where maybe spinning for 10 or 20 minutes for most people is probably good.
So even within the workout, just during like an interval, what I wanted to say about cool down is I saw this a lot during like the last camp that we were at where we were doing hill repeats and the interval would be up the hill and then everyone would flip and just coast down the hill. And I spent so much time trying to yell at everyone to just spin their legs, even if the power is still reading 0, just moving your legs.
Right.
Because it hurts to restart after that. So it's a mini cool down within the interval, I guess. Like it's the recovery portion.
So the question is whether you want to cool down in that situation. I'm just trying to think if I finished everything about cooling down. I think that's the main thing. You probably should cool down, and again, do it on your workout days so that then at the race you're not wondering what you should do, because the race is just an interval workout. There's a warm up, there's an interval, which we call a race, then you're done and you cool down. If you could press the lap button between all those things, that would be fantastic. But it's the same workout. It's a warm-up, a race, or an interval workout, and then a cool down. So to your point, say we're doing mountain bike intervals or running. We've been doing a lot of running up the ski hill here. And it has the same sort of problem because there's always going to be a down portion when you're doing hill intervals. And I think sometimes you just have to do what you have to do. You're right that if you can pedal, you'll feel better. People would say their legs feel full. If you've ever done like a big long mountain descent or something and then had to start again, or stopped at a coffee shop and then had to start again, you've probably felt that like clunky, slow feeling. I think with hill intervals, especially hard ones like a VO2 interval, there is some theory to keeping your heart rate up. And you can define what that means, but not so low that you're like into recovery ranges, so that when you start the next interval, the time it takes to get into the zone, I guess, for lack of a better term, but to get like the activation of, I guess, VO2, like time in range, it just gets there quicker. Right. So if you let it go all the way down to 0, then it takes longer to get to 100. But if you can keep it at 65 or 70, then you're back up into that range sooner. But I think sometimes that's just the nature of it. So I think when they're talking about structure for mountain biking, I think there's probably the overarching thing is sometimes it just needs to be like a more monotonous, repetitive, like up the 3-minute hill, down the 3-minute hill. But there could be some fun descending. Like that's the way I always looked at hill intervals, is it means I get to come down something a bunch, right? So if you can just rig up a bit of a downhill run, that can be pretty specific. Obviously be careful on your way down, but that's again a pretty specific skill to mountain biking, is that you need to be cross-eyed and come down.
That was like one of your favorite parts about Ventura in California.
Yeah, there's a urban park, yeah.
So you'd ride the hill like on the road, you'd go crazy going up it, and then you get to rip this cool little single track section down. Yeah,
and it had jumps and stuff. But that was a great example. So I used the hill, so I knew how long it took me to get up the hill generally, and I could gauge my progress. I'd start at the same spot, and then I'd finish wherever I finished, depending on the day. And during the interval, you can see how that changes. So that's great pacing exercise and very like focused practice. If we talk about deliberate practice, we're getting feedback on how our efforts are sort of going. A lot of times I would have wattage with that too, but you almost don't need it because you can see most important thing is getting to the top of the hill.
Right.
So that would be an example of a structured workout. But then the next day we might go do a 4-hour mountain bike ride, and that might be 30 minutes on the road to the trailhead, climb up a mountain, descend a mountain, a bit of more trail time, ride back home 30 minutes, warm up, cool down is done. And that might be an endurance ride with some harder elements in it because it's mountain biking. But my classic thing is always just 65 to 85%. So you're just avoiding, big sprints or like similar VO2 efforts that you did the day before. And then for a pretty fit person, we'd maybe do a road day that's much more steady. And that's, I think, what is missing in a lot of mountain bikers' schedule is just that day, that endurance day where it's, maybe 65 to 75%, but very steady, no breaks. And that could be your mountain bike on a path or something like that too.
Sure.
And then there should be an off day in there too. So I wouldn't say everyone does 3-day blocks. It could very easily be VO2 day, off day, mountain bike day, off day, road day, off day, or it could be 2-day blocks with those sort of arranged how you like.
So to me, it sounds like the short answer is like, it may seem tempting to assume that like I'm mountain biking, therefore I can't possibly do a structured workout, but there's kind of always a way to do a structured workout if you want to actually make it happen.
I think so. I think, even I'll ride, I think you're exactly right. I don't know that I needed to add a ton to that. I think having a purpose,
yes,
right?
But you'd like to argue with it.
No, there's hill interval days, and then there's sort of endurance days, or you could group maybe like a threshold interval, like a off-road TT into maybe whichever pool you want to. That's probably more your intensity day, really. But you can still pay attention to how long it takes you to get around a loop or up a hill. But I think the important thing is like a lot of people, and this isn't even a mountain biker thing, but when we talk about training versus just riding, there's a purpose to the day. So it might be an endurance day, or this is a hard interval day. But within those hard interval days, it's not as hard as I possibly can go up a climb and get my Strava KOM and then just nothing, right? Because that's not really training. That's like one effort.
Right.
But so rather than 1 times at 2:45 up my 3-minute hill, I'll do 7 at 3 minutes versus, right? So it's not my fastest efforts ever, but I get 7 of them in the quote unquote zone. Right, so I think that's the thing to keep an eye on if you're concerned about training and structure is like, is there any sort of method to that? Is there like any sort of standard intervals in there? Is there variation day to day in the volume and intensity? And I think that's where the structure comes from. And I think probably you could do a really good job just thinking like short and hard mountain bike day, and then ride the path day, and then you have sort of high intensity and low intensity, right?
Right.
But, yeah.
Perfect. Love it. All right, so this last one is from Sean. He said, thanks for all the great podcasting. Hooray! He has a question about recovery and commuting via bike. So he commutes about 15 miles a day, 5 days a week on city roads, so lots of red lights and stop signs. It's more convenient for him than driving, but after a hard weekend of bike racing, so cross, mountain bike, or hiking or something else, he still rides. So he's wondering if this is hurting his recovery by slowing down the ability to recover, or has his body accepted this as normal? And lastly, this is the question I really like. Would you generally count this time and effort in training at all? I've done it here and there, just to get an idea and get anywhere from 35 to 50 TSS for the round trip. I basically try to keep the effort low whenever possible, but there's always something that throws that off. So I really like this because we don't commute to an office, but we do walk all of our errands or like ride to the gym, stuff like that. So I am always kind of struggling to figure out what bucket I put, a 10K grocery walk. I
don't know that there's, like, we do longer walks, but I mean, 2K, like, he's riding for probably an hour at like a light pace to get 30 TSS, and if that's both ways, then that could be a fairly significant load.
I think it's 15 miles total per day.
Okay. So I mean, 30, that to me would be like a recovery spin for that TSS. I mean, he could be doing sprints during that, but we know the distance and rough time, right? So it's interesting. A lot of clients we just understand between us that they commute most days of the week because it makes it clunky. Just, they probably don't wear a heart rate monitor or have a power meter. And if you're wearing street clothes, I always say, like, if it's something that like a normal person could do on a a rental, what are those bikes called?
Like a city bike type
Yeah,
thing?
like if we're talking about a city bike and a normal person can do it, then it's probably just normal person activity, right? And that's why we're here. Our podcast is based around this moving throughout the day. So I think that's that. I think a lot of people incorporate, they try and go longer on some days on their commutes and, sort of add it into their riding. I think that's a great strategy. So like you maybe ride in the morning, but you bring some clothes and then you make it longer, right? Like you just leave from the office and do a bigger ride. So I think that's a way to leverage that. I think it benefits you. Most people are pretty limited on the volume they have. So I don't think I'd say stop. I think the only thing I'd add is just from like the previous question, maybe there's some days of the week that it would be good to, take the bus or take the e-bike or drive, right? Just to sort of offload things a bit.
Yeah, I guess if like time is of the essence, but if he's been doing this for years, I don't think it's that big of a deal. I mean, there are plenty of people who work, I guess it would partially depend on what he does for work, but I mean, the average person actually, including people who are training, do kind of need more of this like movement throughout the day kind of stuff going on anyway. So to me, if he's working in an office, riding for an hour really casually is like just kind of part and parcel of like what a normal human should be doing throughout the day.
Yeah, I think for sure most days it's probably fine, and even after a long, like his question's more after like a hard weekend of racing and hiking, and
right.
It seems like they're pretty active on the weekend. Would you take a Monday off day? I don't know. I think I'd be tempted sometimes, especially if it was like double weekend of racing into another double weekend of somewhere in that week, just to have a day where you're not doing as much. But Molly's point of, if the whole day you're very passive, not doing a lot, then maybe that's the only chance at activity. So you might end up feeling better. But I think that idea of undulating the stress still applies to even those recovery rides, because they are, not an insignificant portion.
Yeah, for sure.
The only thing that like driving sometimes allows, it sucks, but if you can leave your car and bring your suits for the day, your change of clothes and stuff, then you could leave your car maybe there for a day or two or for the whole week. I don't know your situation. And then, like I say, do a bigger ride on the way home on Tuesday. So then now you're sort of leveraging the day off to get prepared for the week. And then, you don't have to haul as much stuff the other days of the week, and you can start doing maybe some longer rides, and, your family doesn't even know the difference. It's, an hour commute home versus a 90-minute commute home, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I'd say if you have a recovery ride scheduled on Monday, you could probably count your commute as your recovery ride.
Yeah, people sometimes make that mistake for sure if we haven't like explicitly talked about it well enough. Like, I think the difference is close enough there.
So just skip whatever recovery ride is on your...
Yeah, it's an odd thing, right? Because it's so similar for sure. Like, I don't know. You just need to have a system. So, I mean, if we think about calculating TSS, right, people have the same struggle with strength training, right? Because it's not really captured. The stress of like a single deadlift isn't really captured in TSS very well. TSS is, I guess it's not really in Training Peaks, but it was a system to develop like the fatigue basically you have from training, right? So your training stress score for a given workout. So it's not as simple as heart rate times time, but that's what it's sort of based on, or power. So how much power you're doing and then for how long.
Yeah.
Right, so it's the stress. How hard was that workout? And it's trying to put that into a common language based on your fitness. So the question is, do you need to include those in it? And then what are you going to do with that extra information?
I guess it depends. I mean, as long as your coach knows about it, like you were saying. So I'd say that would be my only thing, is just make sure whoever's making your training plan is aware that you're pedaling for an extra hour a day. Yeah,
and that you're carrying this extra 30 TSS potentially, on a daily average, right? Because that will sort of contribute in when we start looking at your chronic training load. But everything's relative to you in those terms. So I think, to me, I would just leave it out so that the calendar's easy and you don't have to wear your Garmin as much and heart rate straps and post your comments for that. Like, you may as well just put that effort into the workouts that are actually sort of the key workouts, I guess.
Definitely. Cool. I think that wraps that one up.
Yeah.
As always, we'd love to hear more questions and episodes that you'd like to hear, topics you'd like to hear covered, sports you want to check out, all that fun stuff. You can leave us a comment. We have a contact form over on consummateathlete.com. We'll have the cyclocross remount and dismount course info in the show notes. Or you can reach out to us on Twitter. That's at Peter Glassford and at Molly J. Herford with any questions, comments, all that fun stuff. And yeah, we'll be back next week with yet another exciting episode, and I'm super stoked. I'll be anyone in Washington, D.C. area, or any females in Washington, D.C., I'm doing a women's shop talk at the Rafa Cycle Club in D.C. on September 12th, I believe. So I'll put that up in the show notes as well, and hopefully I'll see some of you there, and if not there, then maybe in Madison for the first World Cup of the season. Woo! All right, take care, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much for tuning into the Consummate Athlete podcast. You can check out my stuff over at theoutdooredit.com or by following me on Instagram and Twitter at Molly J. Herford. And you can check out Peter's coaching, training plans, blogs, all that fun stuff over at smartathlete.ca or by following him on Twitter and Instagram at Peter Glassford. And if you want to support this show and other awesome podcasts, please check out wideanglepodium.com for show info, other podcasts, bonus content, and to become a donating member so you can get all of that rad behind the scenes content and help keep shows like this on the air. And lastly, if you're enjoying this podcast and all the information that we're bringing to you every single week, do us a solid and pop into iTunes to leave us a rating and review. It takes you about 2 seconds. You can do it on your computer, you can do it on your phone, and it really helps us out. Thanks so much, and we will see you next week.